We are joined now on our guest hotline by Chris Cotillo of MassLive. Chris, do we catch you leaving Penn Station? Where are you right now in the greater Manhattan area?
Yeah, I'm under the shadow of the Empire State Building right now, so you can't write scripts like this.
Oh, wow. Beautiful. Thank you for setting the scene for us. You, of course, have been covering this Red Sox team for several years now. You've seen the ups and downs of the Red Sox, especially in the late summer, post-trade deadline, all-star, all of that with Alex Cora. How worried should fans be by the last two series that the Red Sox dropped?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's 3 games. They won the first 2 against Miami, which seems like a while ago because those were 3, not great losses, especially, Sunday against Miami. And then Tuesday, probably the worst of the year. Maybe that's recency bias, but when you have that many opportunities, late in the game, it's definitely tough. I think it's just you see, over those 3 games, a couple of holes exposed when it comes to the roster being, top heavy and not having a ton of depth, right? I mean, you look at, there's like 8 or 9 players on the team that have kind of held this thing together for a while, and they're the reason that they have been, very good over the last 2.5 months. Rowan Anthony right at the top of that list, but obviously Bregman and the bullpen, Chapman and Whitlock, and the rotation, Bayo, Giolito, Crochet. Beyond that, there's a lot of guys that you're asking a lot from. And we've seen ups and downs from those guys. So I think that they are, with the group they have, fully healthy and getting Justin Slayton back and maybe a reinforcement or 2 from AAA, a good team and one we expect to contend over the next 6 weeks. But if any of those kind of stars, that group of 8, 9, 10 guys gets hurt or more than one gets hurt, it could be ugly because you just don't have, I think, that depth across the roster and some places where it's important, especially the bullpen.
Chris, you mentioned the depth there that the Red Sox are lacking, and something we've seen the last few years is after the trade deadline, they've tailed off significantly, missed the playoffs, obviously. How do you feel about them this year? I mean, I know you mentioned it's just 3 games that they lost, and they did win the first 2 against Miami, but are you more confident in them kind of staying the course and being a playoff team this year? Do you have any concerns that this could be early signs of them tailing off as they have the past couple of years after underwhelming trade deadlines?
I mean, I think it comes down to pitching. With them, they obviously have had a lot of injuries there. It doesn't feel that way for some reason, but, Houck out for the year. Cutter Crawford won't pitch this year. Patrick Sandoval hasn't and won't. And then, Hunter Dobbins, who was actually a bright spot in the rotation, out. That's 4 starters you're down. So they need really Crochet to not take a step back, and he hasn't other than one start in Houston, and Bayo and Giolito to be really, really good down the stretch and hope you catch lightning in a bottle with Dustin May and maybe Walker Buehler, or you move on and call up a Kyle Harrison. So I just think, like, when you look at that group, you need them to keep hitting that 90th percentile outcome to keep staying in this thing. Any step back from the rotation, and it's going to be tricky because they don't have the depth, and obviously those guys are getting to a point of a high workload. Where they are, though, is in a better place in the standings. I think that's obviously inarguable. They're in possession of a playoff spot. There's still a couple games between them and the teams behind them, whether it be Kansas City or Cleveland and Texas further back. Seeding matters, but I think, the main objective is just going to be getting in, and that's what they'll try to do. Starting tonight with I think, you look at a 4-game series against the surging Yankees team, it's, as crunch time gets.
What do you see going on with the situational offense from this team? Obviously, they load the bases 3 straight innings in the last game that we saw them and weren't able to bring anyone home. Can you see any common denominator between these types of games where they're not able to get the runs in?
Yeah, I mean, it was an issue early in the season, and then I think, really from the time Anthony came up, for whatever reason, there was just a contagious kind of feeling, him coming up and then Bregman coming back. And then when they flipped the leadoff spot and put him there and Duran third, especially, the offense had been, delivering and getting hits in those runners in scoring position situations. And it had been a group that had done that and been pretty good with that over the course of a few months. So it's probably a regression to the mean a little bit the other night. Obviously, played out as badly as it possibly could have. I think, you look at, the 3 situations they had there. the first one, I think they just got beat by this Rico Garcia guy who I'd never heard of, honestly. But
what is up with that?
And was
Cotillo, he's on like 3 different teams this year.
Right.
And he throws just like great stuff, and he's 31 years old.
Yeah, I was that was just wow, tip your hat to this guy for some reason. And then, the third of the 3, Abraham Toro, who was just DFA'd, he hit an absolute rocket to the wrong place, hit the ball hard, and there was a double play ball. There's not much you can do about that. The one, I would question is that Geraldo is walking the world in the 9th inning, and Trevor Story swings and chases on the first pitch there. That was probably the second guess, and obviously, that put him behind in that at-bat. So I think it just kind of played out, and it was so bad that it makes it seem like a problem. They've actually been pretty good with it. I think the top of the lineup for a while now, you see what Anthony can do as an on-base machine, and then Bregman right behind him, Duran, Story. From there, they need somebody else to step up, whether it be Abreu, who's banged up right now. Rafael has been horrendous since the break. Yoshida has not shown that he is a guy who should be in the middle of the order. So maybe Nathaniel Lowe's the guy. You have him hit 5th or 6th and see if he can carry you and get hot. He had a big homer the other night. Maybe Rafaela gets on a heater. We've seen that, obviously, already this season. Maybe Narvaez, with some extra rest here, gets to the point where he can be the 5 or the 6. But for now, a little top-heavy, but still a pretty good group when everybody's in it.
Talking to Chris Cotillo of MassLive. And, Chris, I want to follow up on something you just said, because Abraham Toro has been DFA'd. You mentioned Nathaniel Lowe and his home run the other night. What are some reasonable expectations? Because I think a lot of Red Sox fans, they think, oh, well, the Nationals stink, and they DFA'd this guy, so how much better can he be here in Boston? But what are some reasonable expectations for Nathaniel Lowe these final 6-7 weeks of the season?
Yeah, I think when you look at, the Nationals, what's the point when you're a team, 25 games under 500 of seeing a 31-year-old who's going to be, basically non-tendered after the season? What do you want to see from him over 6 weeks when you have young guys you can assess? It's a really valuable time for bad teams because they can call up young guys and see who plays well, and I think that's what they're trying to do. If he was on a contender, maybe he gets a longer leash, and I hope that, because he's been a playoff performer in the past, he can do it down the stretch. I think that was kind of a perfect fit for the Red Sox at the perfect time. They weren't able to get that first baseman at the trade deadline. They waited 2 weeks and gave up literally nothing, like $250,000, which is not nothing to me, but to them it is. And I feel like, that was the type of thing that they can have him play a very specific role. He's going to play against righties. You have Romy Gonzalez taking care of that position against lefties. And it just is a guy with, as you've seen with the stat line, the same floor as Toro, right? But a much, much higher ceiling. The pop, obviously, we saw that display. That was the 17th homer of the year. A guy who, like I said, he had 3 postseason homers for the Rangers 2 years ago when they won the World Series, including 2 in that dramatic ALCS against Houston. Bregman was talking about what he's seen from afar because, the Rangers beat them in that series 2 years ago. So it's a guy I think that, can come in for these last 6 weeks, and a guy who you feel better about starting in a playoff game than Abraham Toro. And to get him for that price, I think is, pretty good this time of year. Kind of fell into their lap, and he's a guy who's not going to be afraid, and I think he's going to play a lot here. To expect that he's going to come out and, give you top of the lineup production is probably a little silly considering he's hit 215 all year. But he's a guy that has that track record, and, that's something.
The Red Sox have had the 5-1 edge over the Yankees this season so far. Last time they saw them, they swept them, and then they shipped off Rafi Devers almost immediately. What grade would you give this team's performance since the Rafael Devers trade? And do you think this is a better team right now going into this Yankees series than they were in that June weekend when they swept them at Fenway?
Yeah, I think probably, a B+. They have played really well. They've taken care of business against some bad teams. They've played really well against some good teams, as we've seen. I think, honestly, people look at the Devers trade as it was one of the biggest pieces of news that we've seen in the last few years in the Red Sox beat for sure. And it was shocking. And we know everything that came with it. When you look at since that date, that's kind of right around when Anthony took off. And I would say he's been the Red Sox MVP since right about then. He had about a slow 2 weeks when he first came up, and since then has been absolutely phenomenal for them. So I would say it's more about that. And what he's brought to the lineup, he's basically, obviously not the pop, but definitely the on base for the production, making it feel like that Devers hole wasn't there. And I think they did a good job, withstanding that, 7 weeks without Bregman. They kept their head above water. And then once he came back, they were able to kind of start rolling, even though he was a little slow at the beginning. And, have to give them credit. And I've said all year that there's a lot of Red Sox teams in the last few years that have kind of, had adversity in whatever fashion kind of sink them. This is a group that's embraced it, and they've kind of pushed through whatever's happened, whether it be, the Devers trade or catastrophic injuries or drama or a bad trade deadline, whatever it is. They're in this position because they've been resilient, no question about that.
So, Chris, we've talked about the Red Sox having troubles with situational hitting as of late. The Yankees are 16th in opponent's batting average with runners in scoring position. Luis Gil hasn't pitched that well since coming back. Max Fried has been struggling as of late, too. I mean, do you look at this series beyond just being obviously Red Sox-Yankees in the playoff race? Is this a good opportunity for the Red Sox to kind of improve some of those situational moments and situational metrics?
I mean, no matter how they get it done, winning 3 out of 4 here would be incredible. Splitting would give you the season series and the tiebreaker, which is, no small thing come October. So, I think for me, it always starts with starting pitching. They have their 3 top guys, not in order, but going, these next 3 days, and Giolito, Bello, who's always dominated the Yankees, and then also, Crochet on Saturday. And, May has been pretty good in his last 2 outings. So, we'll see. The Red Sox are facing 2 lefties without Ref Snyder, which I think is a bigger loss for that than people acknowledge, but just find a way to win no matter how it comes. High scoring games, low scoring games, crazy things happen at the Bronx. We've seen that over time. So we'll see how it goes.
Okay, Chris Cotillo, because we probably won't talk to you before Labor Day, how are you feeling about your very own UNC Tar Heel football team, and what are your expectations? For those that don't know, you are a massive UNC fan, UNC alum. And what are your expectations for Bill Belichick's Tar Heels?
Yeah, I mean, I've been saying 9-3, which is obviously hopeful because I don't know many members of the roster. But, I mean, it's a guy that I think, has shown that he can out-coach his way to wins historically, and that's against NFL coaches. And when you're going up against the likes of Cal and Stanford and Richmond and Charlotte and the teams that are on their schedule, I think that there's probably going to be an edge there. So there's a lot of question marks. No one really knows about the roster. No one knows if Jordan Hudson's going to have a headset or not. My guess is yes. But I know that, there is a huge amount of excitement for Labor Day. MassLive will be well represented both in the press box and the stands that day for the game against TCU, college game day, the whole thing. So I'm excited for it. The way I always put it is the floor is so low that, if this was Bama or LSU or one of those schools that have standards when it comes to football and has a place to, or, has some room to fall, I wouldn't feel great about the risk. But it's North Carolina. It's a 6-6, 7-6 Duke's Mayo Bowl type of operation. And, the ceiling is the roof, as the great Michael Jordan said.
Okay, Chris Cotillo of MassLive, thank you so much for joining us. Good luck with your coverage in this 4-game series out in the Bronx. We hear some of that New York atmosphere right behind you, so we're going to let you go now. But, yeah, where can everybody find your work?
MassLive and the Fenway Rundown podcast.
All right, wonderful. Thank you, Chris.